Beneath the fractured moon, where silver light bled into the endless white, a single wolf's howl shattered the silence like a promise unkept. Alara stumbled through the snow-swept pines, her breath ragged clouds that dissolved into the biting wind. The rejection still burned in her veins, a poison hotter than the fever that had once marked her as Omega, weak, unworthy, a vessel for the pack's disdain. They had cast her out at dawn, the Alpha's decree echoing like thunder over the frozen valley. She brings curse upon us. No trial, no mercy, just the shove into exile, her meager furs and the weight of shame as her only companions. The world beyond the pack's borders was a myth of death, rogues, blizzards, the endless hunger that gnawed at the soul before the body. The forest whispered secrets in the gusts, branches clawing at her like skeletal fingers. Snowflakes clung to her lashes, melting into tears she refused to shed. Why her? The question clawed at her mind, a relentless beast. She had healed the wounded after the last raid, her touch soothing fevers no herb could tame. But whispers had spread, her dreams of ancient tongues, visions of moons weeping blood. Witchcraft, they called it, treason against the pack's fragile peace. Her boots sank deeper with each step, the cold seeping through leather to numb her toes. Ahead, the ridge rose like a scar against the night sky, the path to nowhere. She paused, chest heaving, and pressed a hand to the amulet at her throat, a simple silver chain, its pendant a shard of moonstone etched with runes she could not read, inherited from a mother lost to the same exile. It warmed against her skin, unnaturally, as if alive with some forgotten pulse. Blood had stained it once, her mother's in childbirth, and now it seemed to throb with that same crimson memory. A distant uivo pierced the air, not the pack's triumphant call, but something wilder, laced with agony. Alara froze, heart slamming against her ribs. Rogues? Or worse, the rival clans from the shadowed peaks, their wars spilling like ink over the borders. She should run, hide in some crevice until the storm passed, but the pull was there, instinctive, a thread tugging at her core. Omegas were meant to nurture, to bind, yet hers had been twisted into isolation. The wind shifted, carrying the metallic tang of blood. She crested the ridge, the world unfolding in a vista of jagged ice and starlit void. Below, in a hollow ringed by ancient firs, a fire sputtered defiantly against the snow. Torches flickered, casting long shadows that danced like specters. Figures moved, armored, cloaked in gray steel and fur, their forms hulking under the moon's indifferent gaze. Warriors, by the glint of blades and the low growl of commands. At the center, bound to a stake driven into the frozen earth, knelt a man. No, not a man, a king, even in chains. His broad shoulders strained against iron manacles, dark hair matted with sweat and blood from a gash across his brow. The Alpha King, Thorn of the Northern Realms, whispered in the pack's fireside tales, conqueror, guardian, haunted by the ghosts of battles won at too great a cost. Guilt etched his features, sharp as the cliffs he ruled, eyes like storm clouds, jaw set in defiance that masked deeper torment. Alara's breath caught. Spies had murmured of his flight, betrayed by his own counsel, accused of weakness after sparing a rival's whelp in the last war. Now, hunted by assassins from the Iron Claw's pack, his throne a distant memory. She should flee. An Omega alone was prey. Yet her feet carried her closer, drawn by the amulet's insistent warmth, pulsing like a second heartbeat. The warriors circled him, their leader, a scarred brute with eyes like chipped obsidian, drawing a dagger that caught the firelight in crimson streaks. "The king falls tonight," he snarled, voice gravel over ice. "His blood will seal our claim." Thorn lifted his head, gaze locking on the shadows where Alara hid. For a moment the world narrowed, the wind's howl, the crackle of flames, the metallic scent thickening the air. Instinct screamed danger, but curiosity bloomed, fragile as a frost flower, Who was this broken sovereign, his presence a storm she longed to weather? She stepped forward, snow crunching underfoot, and the warriors whirled. Thorn's eyes widened, not in fear, but recognition, impossible, unspoken. "You," he rasped, voice raw as the wound at his throat. "What tongue do you speak in the dark?" Ilara's lips parted, but no words came. Only the amulet burned hotter, its runes seeming to glow faintly, whispering secrets she had never voiced. The brute advanced, blade raised, and the night exploded into chaos. Weavos rising, steel clashing, blood spilling onto the pristine white. She ran toward the fray, not away, her exile fracturing into something unforeseen. The moon watched, silent witness, as fate's thread tightened, binding the rejected to the fallen. In that instant, amid the swirl of snow and shadow, Ilara felt the first stir of a power long dormant, a language buried in her blood, waiting to be spoken. The snow swirled like vengeful spirits as Ilara plunged into the fray, her heart a thunder in her chest that drowned the warrior's snarls. The brute's dagger arced toward Thorn, but she lunged, her small frame colliding with his arm in a desperate tangle. The blade bit air instead of flesh, skittering across ice, and the warrior roared, shoving her back with a force that sent her sprawling into the drifts. Pain bloomed in her shoulder, sharp as shattered crystal, but she scrambled up, eyes locked on the bound king. His gaze held hers, storm gray, piercing through the chaos, as if he saw not the exile, but something buried deep within. "Run, fool!" Thorn growled, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the cold, straining against the manacles that bit into his wrists. Blood trickled from the gash on his brow, staining the snow in dark petals, but he twisted, using his weight to kick at the nearest assailant. Steel clashed as one warrior drew a sword, the blade whistling through the night, catching the firelight in a deadly gleam. Ilara's mind raced, fear coiling like frost in her veins. She was no fighter, no guardian of realms, just a cast-out Omega, her hands meant for healing, not harm. Yet the amulet at her throat pulsed hotter, its moonstone shard glowing faintly against her skin, as if urging her forward. The runes etched upon it seemed to shift in the moonlight, whispering fragments of words she half remembered from fevered dreams, ancient syllables that tasted of salt and starlight. Fear warred with a strange curiosity, pulling her toward this fallen king like a tide she could not resist. Who was he to her? A stranger? A myth? Or the echo of some forgotten bond? The scarred brute recovered, his obsidian eyes narrowing on her. Another spy? The king's whore, come to die with him? He advanced, boot-crunching snow, his breath fogging the air like a beast's exhale. Ilara backed away, her fingers fumbling for a loose rock, anything to arm herself. But Thorn surged then, breaking one chain with a savage twist. Iron groaned, snapping under the force of his alpha strength, fueled by desperation. He lunged free, tackling the brute to the ground in a whirlwind of fur and fury. Fists met flesh, bones cracking like winter branches, blood spraying in warm arcs that melted the snow beneath them. The other warriors closed in, 2 against 1, their blades drawn in a semicircle of death. Ilara's breath hitched. She could flee now, vanish into the pines and leave this carnage to the winds. The pack had taught her survival meant solitude, rejection, a wall no one breached. But as Thorn fought, his movements a blend of raw power and weary grace, each strike laced with the weight of unseen burdens, something stirred in her core. An instinctive pull, Omega to Alpha, not of submission, but of shared fracture. He was broken, like her, a king haunted by guilt, his throne bartered for mercy in a war that devoured the merciful. One warrior swung at Thorn's flank, the sword grazing his side, tearing through leather and drawing fresh blood. He staggered, a guttural sound escaping his lips, not pain, but rage tempered by sorrow. Ilara acted without thought, grabbing a fallen torch from the fire's edge. Flames licked her hand, singeing skin, but she hurled it at the attacker. It struck true, embers scattering like angry stars, igniting the warrior's cloak in a burst of orange fury. He howled, batting at the blaze, and in that moment of distraction, Thorn dispatched him with a brutal elbow to the throat. The brute rose behind him, dagger reclaimed, poised for the killing blow. Time fractured, the wind's wail, the distant weevo of approaching reinforcements, the metallic reek of blood thick as fog. Alara's lips moved, unbidden, the amulet searing now, its warmth flooding her like liquid moonlight. Words spilled from her, not her own. Thalvir and Sariel, a cadence ancient and lilting, rolling off her tongue like forgotten prayer. The air shimmered, the brute freezing mid-strike, his eyes widening in bewilderment. The dagger slipped from his grasp, clattering to the snow, as if the command had bound his will. Thorn whirled, staring at her, his chest heaving. Recognition flickered in his gaze, mingled with suspicion. "What sorcery is this? Who are you?" His voice was rough, edged with the pain of his wounds, but beneath it lay a melancholy depth, the echo of a ruler who had lost more than battles. The brute shook himself, snarling recovery, and lunged again. Thorn met him, their bodies colliding in a savage grapple, rolling across the frozen hollow. Ilara pressed forward, the strange words still humming in her blood, guiding her hands to the remaining chains that bound Thorn's ankles. They yielded under her touch, unnaturally, as if the metal softened like wax under the moon's gaze. Freed, Thorn rose, delivering a final crushing blow that felled the brute into unconsciousness. The last warrior fled into the shadows, weevos fading into the night. Silence fell, broken only by their ragged breaths and the fire's dying crackle. Thorn turned to her fully, bloodied and towering, his presence a storm contained. Up close, the guilt etched deeper. Lines around his eyes from nights of haunted vigil, a scar along his jaw from some old betrayal. He was no myth, but flesh, warm, wounded, radiating the heat of an alpha's unyielding fire. Yet he stepped back, wariness hardening his features. "You speak the tongue of the elders, lost since the blood wars. Spy or savior? Speak true, or I'll end this now." Alara's hand clutched the amulet, its glow fading, leaving her chilled. Fear twisted with curiosity. She had saved him, or perhaps doomed herself. The connection hummed between them, instinctive, denied by the walls of her exile and his crown's shadows. "I am no spy," she whispered, voice trembling like wind through pines. "Exiled, like you. From grace, from kin. The words, they came unbidden." He studied her, the moonlight silvering his dark hair, casting his face in stark relief. Blood from his side soaked his tunic, the scent mingling with pine and smoke. For a heartbeat, empathy flickered in his eyes. Two rejects under the fractured sky, but he shuddered it, duty's weight pressing down. "Then run while you can. My curse follows me like winter's bite." But the night pressed close, enemies' echoes on the wind, and as snow began to fall anew, blanketing the bloodied ground, Alara felt the thread tighten. Not love, not yet, only the raw spark of possibility, born in fear's forge. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The wind howled through the pines like a lament, carrying the faint, fading weevos of the Iron Claw's reinforcements, a chorus of pursuit that clawed at the edges of the night. Ilara stood frozen in the hollow, her breath shallow plumes in the freezing air, the amulet's warmth now a faint echo against her chest, as if it too recoiled from what she had unleashed. Thorn loomed before her, his silhouette a jagged outline against the dying fire, blood tracing rivulets down his arm, staining the snow in irregular patterns that mirrored the cracks in her own resolve. His eyes, storm-gray and unyielding, searched her face, not with gratitude, but the guarded scrutiny of a king who had learned trust was a blade turned inward. "We cannot stay," he said, his voice a low gravel, edged with the pain he refused to voice. He pressed a hand to his side, where the sword's graze had opened flesh, the metallic scent mingling with the sharp bite of pine sap and charred wood. "They will return, and in greater numbers. The iron claws do not forgive a king's survival." There was no command in his tone, only the weary certainty of one who had danced this dance too many times, betrayed by allies, hunted by shadows born of his own mercy. In the last war, he had spared the whelp of their alpha, a boy not yet blooded, and the council had whispered of weakness, unraveling his throne thread by thread. Alara nodded, though her limbs trembled, the adrenaline's fire ebbing into a bone-deep chill. Exile had taught her the art of flight, but never with another, never with eyes that saw through her like moonlight on frost. She glanced at the fallen brute, his chest rising in shallow defiance, and felt a pang not of pity, but recognition. All were fractured under this moon, alphas and omegas alike, bound by the same unyielding cold. "There," she murmured, pointing to a narrow ravine snaking upward from the hollow, its walls sheer and shadowed, veiled by overhanging boughs heavy with ice. "A cave, perhaps. I passed it coming down. The wind hides its mouth." Thorn's gaze followed her gesture. Assessing, then he moved, retrieving a fallen sword from the snow, its blade etched with runes that gleamed dully in the starlight. He offered her no thanks, no touch, but as they slipped into the ravine, his presence at her back was a shield, instinctive and unspoken. The path was treacherous, snow giving way to slick rock, the wind whipping flakes that stung like needles. Alara's boots slipped once, her hand shooting out to steady against the wall, and Thorn's arm caught her waist. Brief, firm, a jolt of heat through layers of fur that sent her pulse skittering. He released her as quickly, as if the contact burned, his breath ragged in the silence between gusts. "Why help me?" he asked after a time, his voice cutting through the night's symphony of creaking branches and distant howls. They pressed on, the ravine narrowing until the walls pressed close, forcing them nearer, their shadows merging in the faint glow of the moon filtering through the canopy. Alara felt the weight of his question, heavy as the amulet, stirring the embers of her own wounds. Rejection had been her constant companion, the pack's scorn a mirror to her hidden gifts, visions that whispered of blood and forgotten oaths, dismissed as madness. "I felt it," she replied, her words soft, carried away by the wind. The cold clawed at her cheeks, but inside a warmth bloomed, fragile and unbidden from the shared rhythm of their steps. The pull, like the moon calling the tide, and those words, they were not mine, but yours, somehow. She touched the amulet, its moonstone cool now, the blood stain from her mother's passing a faint, crimson ghost beneath her fingers. It had always been her anchor in solitude, a symbol of lineage lost, but tonight it thrummed with new purpose, as if the runes aligned with the scars on Thorn's soul. He was silent for a stretch, his footsteps measured despite the wound that slowed him, blood seeping through his torn tunic to drip onto the path behind. When he spoke, melancholy laced his tone, a king's confession to the void. "The elder tongue died with my ancestors. In the blood wars that carved these realms, it bound pacts in oaths unbreakable, spoke to the spirits of earth and ice. If you wield it." He trailed off, suspicion flickering anew, but beneath it lay a deeper fracture, the guilt of a ruler who had chosen compassion over conquest, only to watch his kin pay the price. His council's betrayal had been swift, whispers of his softness turning to open revolt, assassins sent under the guise of justice. "You are no mere exile. What curse do you carry, Omega?" The cave mouth yawned before them, a black maw framed by icicles like fangs, exhaling a breath of deeper cold. They ducked inside, the space narrowing to a chamber where frost glittered on walls veined with quartz, reflecting the moonlight in prismatic shards. Ilara gathered brittle branches from a forgotten nest, her hands steadying as she coaxed a small fire to life with flint from her pouch. Flames danced, casting golden flickers that softened the edges of Thorn's face, revealing the weariness etched there, the hollows under his eyes from sleepless nights, the faint tremor in his hands as he bound his wound with strips torn from his cloak. She watched him, the fire's warmth a balm against the encroaching chill, and felt empathy stir, tentative as a thaw. He was no invincible sovereign, but a man marked by duty's blade, his strength not in conquest, but in the quiet choices that haunted him. "Curse or gift I do not know," she said, settling across from him, the amulet catching the firelight, its runes seeming to pulse faintly once more. "The pack saw only weakness in my dreams, my touches that eased pain without cause. They banished me for it, fearing what they could not control." Her voice cracked, the admission raw, vulnerability hanging between them like smoke. Thorn met her gaze across the flames, the fire's crackle, the only sound for a heartbeat. In his eyes, she saw the mirror of her exile, his own rejection by those he had sworn to protect. "Strength is not the roar of war," he murmured, echoing an ancient proverb half remembered, his voice softening with a compassion born of shared isolation. "It is the mercy that endures after the battle." The words bridged the space, empathy weaving into something deeper, a bond forged not in passion, but in the quiet recognition of wounds that mirrored. Yet he pulled back, as if sensing the danger, the instinctive draw of Alpha to Omega threatening the walls he had built. Outside, the wind rose, Weavos drawing nearer, a reminder that refuge was fleeting. Ilara's hand brushed the amulet, and a whisper of the elder tongue stirred in her mind, fragments of protection, of binding fates. The night deepened, the fire their fragile sentinel, as the thread between them tightened, empathy blooming into a trust neither dared name. But in the shadows, doubt lingered. Was she his salvation, or the key to a doom that would consume them both? The moon, peering through a crack in the stone, watched in silver silence, its light a promise of revelations yet to unfold. The fire's embers pulsed like a faltering heart in the cave's throat, casting erratic shadows that danced across the quartz-veined walls, turning frost into fleeting ghosts. Ilara sat huddled in her furs, the chill seeping through despite the flame's meager warmth, her body a vessel of exhaustion and unspoken tremors. The amulet rested heavy against her chest, its moonstone shard now a cool weight, as if the power that had surged through her in the hollow had retreated, leaving only echoes in her blood. Outside, the wind's wail rose and fell, a mournful dirge laced with the distant weavos of the iron claws, hunters closing in, their pursuit a relentless tide against the night. Thorn shifted across from her, his broad frame silhouetted by the firelight, the makeshift bandage at his side darkening with fresh blood. He had stripped away his torn tunic, revealing the map of his scars. Pale lines crisscrossing his chest like frozen rivers, each a testament to battles waged and mercies granted at bitter cost. His eyes, shadowed under heavy brows, fixed on her with an intensity that bordered on accusation, yet softened by the melancholy that clung to him like frost. "The elder tongue," he murmured, his voice a rumble low as thunder trapped in stone. "It has not been spoken in these lands since my grandfather's fall. Oaths sworn in it bound the packs against the endless winters, called spirits from the ice to guard our borders. How does an exile, a stranger, wield it as if born to the words?" Ilara's fingers traced the amulet's runes, the etched lines rough under her touch, stirring fragments of memory. Her mother's whispers in the night, tales of a lineage veiled in secrecy, gifts dismissed as curses by the pack. Rejection had been her cradle, the Omega's mark, a chain that isolated rather than bound. She had healed with touches that defied herbs, soothed fevers with visions that pierced the veil, but always in silence, lest the whispers turned to fangs. Now, in this king's gaze, she felt exposed, the walls of her solitude cracking under the weight of possibility. "It comes in dreams," she confessed, her voice threading through the fire's crackle, soft as snow settling. Visions of blood under the moon, words that taste of salt and sorrow. The pack called it madness, banished me for the fear it bred. But tonight, it saved you. Or perhaps it called you to me. He leaned forward, the movement pulling a wince from his lips, blood's coppery scent sharpening the air, mingling with the earthy damp of the cave and the faint smoke of dying wood. The firelight gilded his skin, highlighting the ancient scar along his jaw, a mark from the blood wars he had let slip earlier, when mercy had cost him a brother's life. Guilt was his shadow, etched deeper than any blade. The king who spared enemies only to watch his own turn traitor, his throne a pyre of good intentions. "If it's a gift, it's one that could unmake us both," he said. His tone laced with the philosopher's lament, eyes searching hers as if sifting for deceit. "The tongue awakens the old pacts. Speak it again, and the spirits might heed or devour." The wind outside surged, rattling loose stones at the cave's mouth, and a low weevo echoed closer, sending a shiver through Alara's core. Fear coiled in her gut, but beneath it bloomed something fiercer, curiosity, a spark of the power she had long denied. She closed her eyes, the amulet warming once more, its pulse syncing with her heartbeat, drawing forth the buried cadence. The words rose unbidden, lilting and ancient. "Sila Ryan Vethlor, en Tharil Nai." The air thickened, humming with an unseen force, the fire flaring brighter for an instant, flames leaping high to lick the ceiling in a burst of golden fury. Visions flooded her mind, flashes of Thorn's past, not her own. A young king on a bloodied field, sparing the Iron Claw's whelp amid the carnage, his council's faces twisting in betrayal. A throne room under moonlight, oaths shattered like ice. And deeper, a prophecy whispered in the elder tongue, of a voice lost that would reclaim the realms from winter's grip. She gasped, eyes snapping open, the cave spinning as the power receded, leaving her drained, sweat beating cold on her skin. Thorn stared, transfixed, his breath caught, the color leaching from his face. Recognition dawned in his gaze, not suspicion now, but awe mingled with dread, the melancholy king glimpsing his destiny's thread. "You saw it," he whispered, rising to his knees despite the pain, the fire's glow illuminating the raw vulnerability in his features. "The binding of the North. My ancestors foretold a speaker of the lost words, one who would heal the fractures of the blood wars, not with steel, but with the Spirit's grace. An Omega, they said, marked by exile and blood." His hand hovered near hers, not touching. But the space between crackled with the instinctive bond, alpha to the key that could redeem or ruin him. Alara's heart thundered, the revelation a double-edged blade. She was no longer just the rejected healer, but the pathfinder of legend, her dom occulto the bridge to a fate that terrified her. The pack's scorn echoed in her mind, weakness, witchcraft. Yet here, in this cave's intimacy, it felt like rebirth, fragile and fraught. "I am no savior," she protested, voice trembling, the wind's howl underscoring her doubt. "What if it brings only more blood? Your mercy cost you everything. Mine could doom us both." Philosophy wove through her words, a quiet challenge. What is destiny, if not the choice to embrace the wound? Thorn's expression softened, the guilt in his eyes yielding to a quiet resolve, the fire reflecting in their storm-gray depths like stars in a tempest. "Then we choose together," he said, the words a vow unspoken, his presence a warmth against the encroaching cold. Empathy had forged their refuge. Now revelation bound them, the amulet's glow a beacon in the dim. But outside, the huevos swelled. Footsteps crunching snow, enemies drawn by the tongue's echo, the night pressing in with promises of confrontation. The moon's sliver pierced a fissure in the rock, bathing them in silver, as Alara realized. She was the key, not to his throne, but to the redemption he carried like a scar. The power stirred again, whispering of trials ahead, and in that moment, amid the cave's hush and the fire's fading sigh, their fates intertwined, a tapestry of blood and moonlight yet to unfold. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your worth. The huevos swelled into a savage symphony, crashing against the cave's mouth like waves on jagged shore, pulling Alara from the revelation's haze. Her skin prickled. The amulet's pulse, now a frantic drum against her chest, sinking with the thunder of approaching paws through the snow. Thorn rose in a fluid motion, pain etching his features but not slowing him, his hand closing around the sword's hilt as shadows lengthened in the fire's dying glow. The air thickened with the scent of frost and fury, the wind carrying the guttural snarls of the iron claws. More than before, a pack unleashed, drawn by the elder tongue's echo like moths to a forbidden flame. "Stay behind," Thorn commanded, his voice a low growl laced with the melancholy of a king who knew commands meant little in the face of fate. But Alara shook her head, the power stirring in her veins like liquid silver, no longer a whisper, but a current she could not deny. Exile had stripped her of illusions. The pack's rejection had forged her into something sharper, a blade tempered in isolation. She clutched the amulet, its moonstone catching the moonlight's sliver, the faint bloodstain beneath her thumb, a reminder of losses that demanded reckoning. They emerged from the cave into a maelstrom of white and shadow, the ravine transformed into a corridor of ambush. Torches blazed on the ridge above, their flames whipping in the gale, illuminating a ring of warriors, 20 strong, fur-clad and steel-armed, their alpha at the fore, a hulking figure with eyes like molten iron, his pelt scarred from old skirmishes. Kargan, Thorn's betrayer, the counselor who had twisted mercy into treason, selling the king's flight for a promise of power. His laugh boomed over the wind, raw and triumphant, as he descended, boots crunching snow into crimson slush from the hollow's earlier spill. "Thorn, the merciful fool," Kargan spat, his voice gravel and venom circling with predatory grace. "You spared my whelp once, and now the realms pay. The spirits reject your weakness, the pack's cry for a true alpha's blood." His gaze slid to Alara, narrowing in contempt. "And what witch Omega clings to you? The air reeks of old sorcery. Your spy, no doubt, whispering lies in tongues long dead." Thorn stepped forward, sword raised, his body a barrier of coiled strength. But Alara felt the fracture in him, the guilt that weighed heavier than any chain. He had chosen compassion on that bloodied field years ago, halting the slaughter of Kargan's kin, believing oaths could bind where blades divided. But betrayal had followed, the council's whispers turning to daggers in the night, his throne crumbling under the weight of his own heart. Now, faced with the architect of his fall, his eyes darkened with the storm of what might have been, war without end, or a peace forged in forgiveness that had cost him everything. Alara's breath caught, the wind tearing at her furs, carrying the metallic tang of impending blood. The amulet burned, urging words she resisted, for to speak them now would summon forces she barely understood, spirits of ice and oath, unbound since the blood wars. Her pack's faces flashed in her mind, the alpha who had banished her, eyes cold as the valley's frost, deeming her visions treason. They had been her kin, her cage, rejecting the very gifts that now thrummed in her blood. Freedom whispered to her, "Flee this fray, vanish into the endless white, let the kings and traitors devour each other." But Thorn's presence anchored her, his melancholy a mirror to her own. two souls marked by choices that scarred. Kargan's warriors closed in, blades glinting under the moon, their weavos a cacophony that shook the pines. The first lunged at Thorn, sword clashing in a shower of sparks, steel singing through the night. He parried with weary precision, his wound slowing him, blood seeping anew to stain the snow in dark blooms. Alara dodged a flanking blow, her smaller form weaving through the chaos, heart pounding with the visceral rhythm of survival. A warrior seized her arm, his grip iron, breath hot with rage. "The witch dies first," he snarled, dagger rising. Instinct surged. The elder tongue spilled from her lips, unbidden and fierce. "Vethlor Solarian, bind and break!" The air rippled, frost coiling from the ground like serpents, encasing the warrior's legs in crystalline chains. He howled, shattering the ice with brute force, but the moment's hesitation cost him. Thorn's blade found his throat, blood spraying warm against the cold, a crimson arc that painted Alara's cheek. Kargan charged then, his massive frame barreling through the melee, axe swinging in a deadly arc aimed at Thorn's head. They collided, bodies slamming into the snow, rolling in a tangle of fur and fury. Thorn's sword skittered away, lost in the drifts, and Kargan's weight pinned him, the axe raised for the killing stroke. "For the packs you weakened," the traitor roared, spittle flecking Thorn's face, the moon illuminating the raw hatred born of envy for a king's unyielding ethics. Ilara's world narrowed to that blade's edge, the amulet searing like a brand. Love or freedom? The question clawed at her. Flee to the wilds, reclaim her solitude, or bind herself to this fractured sovereign, risking all for a redemption that might shatter them. Forgiveness warred with the urge for vengeance. Kargan's betrayal echoed her pack's scorn, a wound that begged for war's catharsis. But Thorn's eyes met hers through the fray, storm gray and pleading not for aid, but understanding. The melancholy plea of a man who had chosen mercy once and paid dearly, now facing the abyss without it. She stepped forward, the wind howling her defiance, and raised her voice in the ancient cadence, "Thalvir and Sarael, oaths of blood, release or rend." The ground trembled, moonlight intensifying to a blinding silver, spirits manifesting as ethereal wolves of frost and shadow, circling Kargan with luminous eyes. He faltered, axe trembling, the air humming with the weight of forgotten packs, the Blood War's legacy, where alphas had sworn unity under the moon, only to fracture it in greed. Kargan rose, backing away, his warriors hesitating as the spectral forms nipped at their heels, Uivos turning to whimpers. "What sorcery?" he gasped, but Thorn surged up, retrieving his sword, pressing the tip to the traitor's throat. Blood welled, a single drop tracing the snow, mirroring the amulet's stain. "Mercy broke me once," Thorn rasped, his voice thick with guilt's burden, the wind whipping his hair like a crown of thorns. "But it will not end us." He lowered the blade, not in weakness, but choice, the ethical core that defined him, now shared with the Omega who had awakened it. Kargan snarled, retreating with his pack into the shadows, the Weavos fading into defeated echoes, but the confrontation hung unresolved, a seed of greater war. Ilara collapsed to her knees beside Thorn, the power's recoil leaving her hollow, the amulet cooling as the spirits dissolved into mist. His hand found her shoulder, tentative, the touch a spark of warmth in the bloodied cold. Not passion, but the rationalized acceptance of a bond resisted too long. Freedom slipped from her grasp. In its place bloomed the fragile promise of unity, forgiveness over slaughter. Yet doubt lingered, a spiritual dilemma etching her soul. Had she chosen love's redemption, or merely delayed the war that would demand her ultimate sacrifice? The moon watched, fractured and unyielding, as snow began to fall, blanketing the scars of the night in deceptive peace. Snow fell like a shroud of forgotten oaths, veiling the ravine's bloodied scars in layers of pristine white, as if the moon sought to erase the night's brutal testimony. Ilara knelt in the drifts, her body a hollow vessel drained by the Elder Tongue's fury, the amulet's weight now a leaden anchor against her chest. Its moonstone gleamed faintly under the fractured light, the crimson stain from her mother's blood a persistent whisper, binding generations in cycles of loss and latent power. The wind sighed through the pines, carrying the retreating weavos of the iron claws into hollow echoes. But the silence that followed was heavier, laced with the unresolved tremor of choices half made. Thorn stood over her, sword still in hand, its blade dripping the last beads of conflict onto the snow where they bloomed like fleeting roses before freezing into ruby ice. His breath came in ragged clouds, the wound at his side a dark bloom seeping through the bandage, yet he made no move to staunch it further. Guilt shadowed his features, deeper now in the aftermath, the ethical king who had lowered his blade once more, granting mercy to a traitor whose betrayal mirrored the fractures in his own soul. He had spared Kargan not for weakness, but for the belief that war's chain could only be broken by compassion's forge, a philosophy that had cost him his throne and nearly his life. Now, as he gazed down at Ilara, that melancholy resolve softened into something raw, a recognition of the Omega who had become the fulcrum of his redemption. She rose unsteadily, the cold gnawing at her bones, but the touch of his hand on her arm steadied her, a contact no longer fleeting, but deliberate, his warmth seeping through fur and flesh like sunlight piercing eternal winter. The instinctive pull between them, Alpha and Omega, had been resisted in the cave's intimacy, rationalized as survival's illusion amid the encroaching howls. Yet here, under the moon's unblinking eye, it crystallized, not a reward of passion, but a proof forged in shared suffering, a union born of exile's forge. "You chose," she whispered, her voice threading through the wind's hush, eyes lifting to meet his storm-gray depths. They held the weight of his past, battles where mercy had birthed betrayal, nights haunted by the ghosts of the spared and the slain. Again, despite the blood it demands. Thorn's free hand rose, hesitating before cupping her cheek, his thumb tracing the path of dried blood from the fray, a gentle erasure that spoke of healing's quiet power. The scar along his jaw caught the moonlight, silvering the ancient mark from the blood wars, a reminder of oaths shattered long before his reign. "And you spoke," he replied, his tone a low cadence, melancholic yet threaded with wonder. The Pathfinder's voice, awakening what I thought lost forever, not to conquer but to mend. He glanced at the amulet, its runes seeming to pulse in rhythm with their breaths, the bloodstain a symbol bridging their wounds, her mother's exile, his kingdom's fracture. In her, he saw not a spy, but the key to rebirth, the dom occulto that could summon the spirits to reaffirm the old pacts, healing the realm's divides without further slaughter. The wind stirred anew, scattering snowflakes that clung to their lashes like unshed tears, the distant crackle of a dying torch from the hollow underscoring the night's fragile peace. Ilara felt the power stir within her once more, not as a curse, but a gift unveiled, the ability to weave the Elder Tongue into bindings of spirit and ice, calling forth ethereal guardians that had slumbered since the wars. Her pack's rejection echoed faintly, a scar that no longer defined her. In Thorn's gaze, she glimpsed Renascimento, the Omega reborn not in submission, but as equal in destiny's weave. Yet the choice loomed, moral and visceral. Sacrifice the solitude of freedom for this union, or let the thread snap, dooming them to parallel exiles under the indifferent moon. He drew her closer, their foreheads touching, the heat of his body a counterpoint to the encroaching frost, his scent of blood and pine enveloping her like a mantle. "The prophecy spoke of union," he murmured, voice rough with the duty that had long isolated him. "Not as chains, but as strength shared. I have carried guilt like a crown of thorns, mercy's price, the pack's scorn. But with you, it becomes purpose. His words were philosophy made flesh, a king's confession, love as redemption's proof, tested in the fire of trial, accepted not in ecstasy, but in the quiet resolve to heal what was broken. Alara's hand covered his on the amulet, their fingers intertwining, the moonstone warming under the union of their touch. The elder tongue rose in her mind, soft now, a benediction rather than command. Sil arayan vethler, en tharil ne, bind in light, heal in blood. The air shimmered, frost yielding to a subtle thaw, spirits manifesting as luminous wisps that circled them, weaving threads of silver light around their forms. No grand cataclysm, but a visceral renewal, the wounds on Thorn's side knitting faintly under the glow, her exhaustion easing into renewed vigor, the amulet stain fading to a scar of gold. It was sacrifice yielded, her hidden power offered freely, his guilt transmuted into shared guardianship of the realms. They stood entwined as the moon climbed higher, its fractured light bathing them in ethereal grace, the wind's howl softening to a lullaby of distant pines. Kargan's retreat was no end to war's shadow, but a pause, a chance for pacts reborn, forgiveness rippling outward like cracks in ice. Alara felt the bond solidify, resisted no longer. Love as the ultimate choice, rationalized in moments of doubt, accepted in the proof of survival's dawn. Thorn's lips brushed her temple, a seal unspoken, his melancholy lifting like mist under sun, replaced by the ethical fire of a king redeemed. In that embrace, amid the snow's hush and the blood's faint memory, they turned toward the horizon, where the first blush of false dawn pierced the peaks. The pacts would come, trials of power and compassion awaiting, but together they were unbreakable, a union of the rejected and the fallen, destiny's revelation under the eternal moon. Rebirth was not without cost, but in its embrace, rejection became legacy, and wounds the forge of true strength. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.